There's a reason nobody talks about this. And it's much darker than you think. The names you see carved into Ivy League buildings, the faces on your money, the dynasties that shaped America. What if I told you their fortunes were built on a crime so massive, so devastating, it poisoned an entire nation? This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a secret buried in shipping records, hidden in family archives, and whitewashed from every history book you've ever read. Because the truth is, America's aristocracy, Roosevelt, Astor, Forbes, Yale, Harvard, got rich the same way, by flooding China with drugs, destroying millions of lives, and then erasing the evidence. And what you're about to hear will change how you see American history forever. What if the real blueprint for American power wasn't written in the Constitution, but in secret ledgers and coded shipping manifests? Picture this: the most respected families in America, names you see on university gates and city skylines, weren't just merchants or philanthropists. They were architects of a global drug empire, operating with a precision and ruthlessness that would make any modern cartel look amateur. In the early 1800s, while the official story was all about furs, tea, and honest trade, the real money was moving in the shadows. American clipper ships, built for speed and stealth, sliced through the South China Sea under false flags, their holds packed with thousands of pounds of opium. These weren't small-time smugglers. This was industrial-scale trafficking, orchestrated from Boston boardrooms and New York counting houses, with every risk calculated and every bribe accounted for. The profits were staggering for OO returns, mountains of silver pouring into the hands of a few families, while millions in China paid the price with their health, their families, and their futures. But here's the twist: these American elites didn't just copy the British playbook, they improved it. They built faster ships, hired the best navigators, and forged secret alliances with British and Chinese middlemen. They set up offshore drop points, using coded signals and clandestine rendezvous to avoid Chinese patrols. Every detail was engineered for maximum profit and minimum exposure. And while the Chinese government desperately tried to stop the flood of opium, American traders found new routes, new partners, and new ways to hide their tracks. The silver they earned didn't just buy mansions and fine art, it bought influence. It funded the rise of political dynasties, the construction of Ivy League campuses, and the creation of secret societies that would shape American policy for generations. The blueprint was simple: exploit a nation's weakness, extract unimaginable wealth, and then launder it into respectability. And the most chilling part: this wasn't a rogue operation. It was a coordinated, multi-generational project. Fathers taught sons the trade, cousins married into other opium fortunes, and family alliances were sealed with business deals written in code. The same hands that signed opium contracts would later sign university charters and political appointments. The blueprint for American power was never about democracy or merit. It was about control, secrecy, and the ruthless pursuit of profit at any cost. And as the money flowed back to America, the families who masterminded this operation began the next phase: erasing the evidence, rewriting their own histories, and making sure the world would never know the true source of their power. But that was only the beginning. If you think America's most powerful families earned their place through hard work and innovation, you've been sold a fantasy. The real story is far more twisted, and it's hiding in plain sight. Take Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president immortalized on Mount Rushmore, the man credited with saving America from the Great Depression. His family's fortune didn't come from politics or public service. It came from his grandfather, Warren Delano II, who spent over a decade in China as a partner in the largest American opium trading firm. Delano's ships didn't just carry tea and silk, they carried tons of opium, smuggled into China for a profit so obscene it could buy and sell entire towns. When Delano lost his fortune in a financial panic, he simply returned to China, sold more opium, and came back even richer. That money paid for the Roosevelt mansions, the Harvard education, the political connections. FDR's rise wasn't just a story of American opportunity, it was a story built on addiction and misery, half a world away. But the Roosevelts were just one piece of a much larger puzzle. John Jacob Astor, once the richest man in America, is remembered for his fur trade and real estate empire. But the real engine of his wealth was opium. Astor's ships, like the Macedonian, made regular runs to China, trading Turkish opium for silver, then using that silver to buy luxury goods. By the time he died, Astor's fortune was worth hundreds of millions in today's dollars, most of it from the drug trade. His descendants built the Waldorf Astoria, funded libraries, and became the gold standard of American high society. But the source of their wealth? Scrubbed from the official story. And then there's the Forbes family. Yes, that Forbes the magazine, the billionaires list. The symbol of American success. The family's roots are in Boston, but their fortune was made in China. Robert Bennet Forbes and his brother John Murray Forbes captained opium ships, partnered with the same firms as the Delanos, and funneled their profits into railroads and publishing. Their names are etched into Boston's history, their philanthropy celebrated, but the opium connection is almost never mentioned. The same goes for the Perkins family, whose opium millions funded hospitals, schools, and even Yale University's prestigious Perkins Fellowship. The Russell family, founders of Skull and Bones at Yale, built their secret society with opium money, creating a pipeline of power that would produce presidents, senators, and CIA directors. It didn't stop there. The Cabot family, the Low family, old money, blue blood, pillars of the establishment, all made their fortunes in the same way. They traded addiction for influence, misery for legacy, and with every dollar, they built the institutions that still define American power: Harvard, Yale, Columbia, libraries, museums, and secret societies. These weren't just places of learning or culture, they were monuments to a hidden history, paid for with the suffering of millions. The families who profited from the opium trade didn't just buy respectability, they manufactured it, brick by brick, endowment by endowment, until the truth was buried so deep, almost no one dared to dig it up. But what came next would make the cover-up even more chilling. Forget everything you know about crime and punishment, because the scale of what happened in 19th century China makes every modern drug scandal look like child's play. This wasn't a handful of smugglers sneaking contraband through the shadows. This was a full-scale, industrial operation, orchestrated by America's most respected families and executed with military precision. By the 1830s, American firms controlled about 10% of the opium flooding into China, while their British counterparts handled the rest. But don't let that number fool you. 10 meant thousands of chests, each one packed with 140 pounds of pure opium, shipped year after year, decade after decade. The profits were astronomical. A single successful voyage could turn a captain into a millionaire overnight, and the owners into legends. But every dollar earned in Boston or New York was paid for in blood and misery on the other side of the world. The human cost? Catastrophic. By the time the trade reached its peak, an estimated 10 to 12 million Chinese people, about 1 in every 10 adult men, were addicted to opium. Imagine a nation where addiction is so widespread. It seeps into every family, every village, every generation. The Chinese economy, once the envy of the world, was gutted. Silver reserves that had taken centuries to build vanished in a matter of years, drained away to pay for a poison that was illegal, but impossible to stop. Families were torn apart. Entire communities collapsed under the weight of addiction. And when the Chinese government finally tried to fight back, destroying 1,000 tons of British opium in 1839, the response was war. Not just any war, but the Opium Wars, brutal, humiliating conflicts that forced China to pay reparations, open its ports, and cede Hong Kong to the British. The treaties didn't just legalize trade, they made it impossible for China to defend itself against the very poison that was destroying it from within. And while China was being carved up, American traders saw only opportunity. During the chaos of war, when British firms were sidelined, American companies like Russell and Company stepped in to fill the void, ramping up their shipments and raking in even more profit. After the wars, the trade didn't stop, it exploded. The addiction crisis deepened, the economy spiraled, and the suffering multiplied. But in the drawing rooms of Boston and New York, the only thing that mattered was the bottom line. The men who orchestrated this devastation were celebrated as visionaries, philanthropists, and nation builders. Their names were etched into marble, their portraits hung in gilded frames. While the true cost of their wealth was buried under generations of silence, this wasn't just a crime, it was a catastrophe on a scale almost impossible to comprehend. Millions of lives destroyed, a civilization crippled, and a legacy of pain that still echoes in China today. And yet, for the families who profited, it was just business as usual. But the most chilling part, they didn't just get away with it, they rewrote the rules to make sure no one would ever hold them accountable. And what they did next would ensure their secrets stayed hidden for generations. What happens when the architects of a nation's wealth are also the authors of its history? The answer is chilling. The truth gets buried so deep, most people never even know to look for it. After amassing fortunes on the backs of millions of Chinese addicts, America's elite families didn't just walk away with their profits, they launched a campaign of erasure so thorough, it would make any modern PR firm jealous. The Delanos, Astors, Forbes, Perkins, Russells, Cabots, and Lowe's understood that money alone wasn't enough. To secure their place in American legend, they needed to rewrite the story itself. So, they did. They donated to universities, museums, and libraries, but always with strings attached. Endowments came with conditions. Certain facts were to be omitted, certain questions never asked. The result? A sanitized version of history, where the opium trade is a footnote if it's mentioned at all. Visit the FEDR Presidential Library and you'll find the Delano family's opium connection reduced to a vague reference to trade with China. The Astor legacy? All about furs and real estate, with the opium chapter quietly skipped. The Forbes family's official story celebrates railroads and publishing, but the drug money that made it all possible is nowhere to be found. Yale's Skull and Bone Society, founded with Russell opium profits, is shrouded in secrecy, its true origins hidden behind a veil of tradition and myth. Harvard's Cabot House, named for a family whose wealth was built on addiction, never mentions the suffering that paid for its bricks. Even Columbia's Lowe Memorial Library, a monument to philanthropy, was funded by fortunes made smuggling poison into China. The whitewashing wasn't accidental, was systematic, deliberate, and ruthlessly effective. But the cover-up didn't stop at institutions. These families used their influence to shape the very narrative of American greatness. They funded historical societies, controlled foundations, and even influenced what was taught in schools. Generations of Americans grew up learning about the self-made men who built the nation, never realizing that the foundation was soaked in the misery of millions. The evidence was locked away in archives, hidden in coded letters and shipping records, ignored by mainstream historians. And when researchers did uncover the truth, their work was often marginalized, dismissed as irrelevant, or buried under a mountain of more respectable stories. The hypocrisy is staggering. The same families who spent decades erasing their crimes from history also led the charge to criminalize drugs in America, painting users as degenerates, while their own ancestors were celebrated as visionaries. They controlled the narrative so completely that even today, most Americans have no idea where the money that built their universities, museums, and political dynasties really came from. The Great Whitewash wasn't just about protecting reputations, it was about preserving power. And for nearly 2 centuries, it worked. But the cracks are starting to show, and the truth is clawing its way back to the surface. What comes next could finally force a reckoning with the past that America has spent generations trying to forget. Now, here's where the story twists into something almost unbelievable, a hypocrisy so staggering, it's hard to wrap your mind around. The very same families who built their empires by flooding China with opium, who watched millions become addicted and entire communities collapse, would later become the architects of America's war on drugs. Imagine this, the descendants of drug lords, now dressed in tailored suits, sitting in the halls of Congress, writing laws to criminalize the very trade that made their fortunes. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, whose family's wealth was soaked in opium profits, signed some of the strictest drug laws in American history. The Delanos, the Astors, the Forbes, the Russells. These names, once synonymous with smuggling and addiction, were now leading the charge to paint drug users as criminals, degenerates, and threats to society. But why the sudden moral crusade? The answer is as cynical as it is calculated. By the early 1900s, the opium trade had shifted. The easy money was gone, the Chinese market closed, and a new wave of immigrants was bringing opium dens to American cities. Suddenly, the same drug that had built Ivy League endowments and New England mansions was seen as a threat not to the elite, but to their vision of American society. The families who had once profited from addiction now wanted to distance themselves from its consequences. They didn't want competition. They didn't want their own workers, neighbors, or children falling victim to the same poison they had once sold by the ton. So, they used their power to change the narrative. They lobbied for prohibition, funded anti-drug campaigns, and pushed for laws that would send ordinary people to prison for crimes their ancestors had committed on a scale the world had never seen. The hypocrisy didn't stop at legislation. These families used their influence to shape public opinion, funding newspapers and magazines that demonized drug users while celebrating their own philanthropy. They built hospitals and libraries with drug money, then turned around and called for the harshest penalties against anyone caught with a fraction of what their ships once carried. The same names that appear on university buildings and museum wings also appear in the archives of America's earliest drug enforcement agencies. It's a legacy of double standards, where the rich and powerful rewrite the rules to protect themselves and punish everyone else. And the most infuriating part, the story worked. For generations, Americans grew up believing that drug addiction was a problem of the poor, the foreign, the criminal, never realizing that the roots of the crisis stretched straight back to the families who shaped the nation. The architects of America's drug laws were the descendants of its original drug lords, and the cycle of profit, punishment, and erasure continued. But the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of resurfacing. And what comes next could finally force America to confront the hypocrisy at the heart of its own history. This is where the story stops being just history and starts becoming a mirror. Because the legacy of America's opium fortunes isn't locked away in the past. It's alive, pulsing through the veins of the institutions, families, and power structures that still shape our world. Walk through the gates of Harvard, Yale, or Columbia, and you're not just stepping onto a campus, you're walking on the bones of a forgotten empire, built with money wrung from addiction and misery half a world away. The Delanos, Astors, Forbes, Russells, Cabots, Lowe's, these names still echo in boardrooms, on endowments, in the halls of Congress, and the pages of glossy magazines. Their descendants sit on the boards of universities, run foundations, and shape public policy, all while the true source of their family fortunes remains a carefully guarded secret. The buildings they funded, the scholarships they endowed, the museums and libraries that bear their names, these are monuments not just to philanthropy, but to a legacy of exploitation that has never been reckoned with. But here's the question that no one dares to ask: what do we do with this knowledge? Should the institutions built on opium money acknowledge their origins? Should there be reparations, public apologies, or at the very least, a rewriting of the official histories to include the truth? Or do we keep pretending that American greatness was built on nothing but hard work and noble ideals, ignoring the millions who paid the price for someone else's legacy? In China, the memory of the Opium Wars is a scar that never healed, a story taught in every classroom, a warning passed down through generations. In America, it's a secret, a whisper, footnote buried under layers of myth and denial. The contrast is staggering. One nation remembers, the other forgets. And the families who profited from that forgetting are still among the most powerful in the country. The uncomfortable reality is that the same forces that allowed these families to profit from addiction and then erase their crimes are still at work today. Wealth buys silence. Influence rewrites history, and the cycle of exploitation, denial, and self-congratulation continues, generation after generation. The opium fortunes didn't just build buildings, they built a system, a way of thinking. A hierarchy that rewards those who can hide their tracks and punishes those who can't. The real legacy isn't just in the money or the monuments, it's in the questions that still go unanswered. Who gets to write history? Who gets to be forgiven? Who gets to be forgotten? And maybe the most haunting question of all, if the truth about America's most respected families can be buried for 2 centuries, what else don't we know? What other stories have been erased? What other crimes have been laundered into respectability? What other legacies are we still living with, without ever realizing it? The silence is deafening. The evidence is there, waiting to be seen. And the reckoning, if it ever comes, will force us to confront not just the past, but the very foundations of the world we live in. Because the real story of America's opium dynasties isn't just about what they did, it's about what we're still willing to ignore. And that's a question no one wants to answer. So now you know. The story you were never meant to hear. The secret that's been hiding in plain sight for generations. The truth is, the foundations of American power, its wealth, its universities, its dynasties were built not just on ambition or ingenuity, but on a tidal wave of human suffering that swept across the world and left millions in its wake. The Delanos, Astors, Forbes, Russells, Cabots, Lowe's, these aren't just names etched into marble or printed on diplomas. They are the architects of a legacy that began with the calculated poisoning of a nation, the deliberate destruction of lives for profit, and the systematic rewriting of history to cover their tracks. Every time you walk past a grand library, a university hall, or a museum wing bearing one of these names, you're seeing the afterimage of a crime so vast, so meticulously hidden, that it's almost impossible to comprehend. And yet, the evidence is there, buried in shipping records, family letters, and the silent architecture of American privilege. But the real question isn't just about what happened centuries ago. It's about what we choose to do with this knowledge now. Will we keep celebrating the myth of the self-made American dynasty, ignoring the blood money that built our most cherished institutions? Or will we finally demand honesty from the families, the universities, and the museums that have profited from this legacy of exploitation? The silence that has protected these fortunes for so long is starting to crack. But the reckoning is far from over, because the same mechanisms that allowed these families to erase their crimes' wealth, influence, control over the narrative are still at work today, shaping what we see, what we learn, and what we're allowed to remember. And here's the most unsettling part. This isn't just a story about the past. It's a warning about the present. The playbook hasn't changed, only the players and the products have. Power still finds ways to hide its darkest secrets, to rewrite the rules, to turn crime into legacy and suffering into status. The question is, will we keep letting it happen? Or will we start asking the questions that make the powerful uncomfortable, the questions that force us to confront the real cost of the world we've inherited? Because the truth, once seen, can't be unseen. The story, once told, can't be untold. And the legacy of America's opium dynasties will haunt us until we're brave enough to face it head-on. The next time you hear a story about American greatness, remember what's been left out. Remember the millions who paid the price for someone else's fortune. And remember that history isn't just what's written in books, it's what's hidden between the lines, waiting for someone to dig it up. If this changed the way you see the world, don't let the story end here. Share it, question it, demand more, because the truth doesn't stay buried forever, and the reckoning, when it comes, will be written by those who refuse to look away.